looking at your blood sugar is the single most important thing you can do for your health. 50%, 1 in 2 people in the US are either insulin resistant or already type 2 diabetics. So they're people with diabetes. It also contributes to obesity. We're predicted to have 50% of the US population being obese. And then we got over 70% of the population's overweight. Most of the time, it's about glucose dysregulation. Your body isn't processing glucose appropriately. I've grown up with people with diabetes in my family. My earliest kind of thought around this was, I remember when I was a 6-year-old and I would have to go up to my grandmother. So we'd see grandma once a year. They lived up in the mountains in Pennsylvania, had a hunting lodge and bar. And I would run into the lodge and run to grandma, and she'd be sitting there next to a window in the sunlight, cataracts over her eyes, digits that were, gone from her diabetes, blind. And she would have to basically kind of feel my face and be, oh, you're growing up so young and handsome, Jimmy. Well, what do you think I was thinking as a 6-year-old with a blind person, with digits that were gone, feeling on my face? And it was like freaking me out. I was like, wow, Grandma, I love you dearly. I don't want to end up like this. And then my father was early diagnosed as a person with type 2 diabetes. He's a world famous chef. So he's tasting everything. This is growing up in the 60s, right? So he's a person with diabetes. All my aunts and uncles for the most part. And then, of course, when I went through school, I started to understand just how important it was. But glucose regulation for me hit home because all of my family, basically, were touched by it. When your glucose is dysregulated, it is the single biggest thing that is going to drive you towards the biggest chronic illnesses. First thing you want to know is that you want to avoid big glucose oscillations or big glucose spikes. So after you eat, you don't want your glucose to spike up real high and then come down. One, you end up making some cortisol from that, so you induce some stress hormone response. But secondly, your body has to you start to train your body to make more insulin. And the problem with that is when you get insulin resistant, that starts triggering more inflammatory chemistry, and you make more adrenaline and noradrenaline, and your blood vessels start to get more stiff. And now you're not delivering as much blood flow into your kidneys. And one of the very early signs is you could get renal hypertension. Your blood pressure starts going up. Managing your glucose. I love people using CGMs or continuous glucose monitors in order to understand what effects various things have on their glucose regulation. But more importantly, you still got to get blood glucose. The more accurate way to really understand it is a first morning glucose. And yes, if you're having trouble sleeping, that disrupts your glucose. If you're eating right before you go to bed, it could be disrupting your glucose. The kind of foods that you select, high sugar, high carb. It could even be people that are eating ketogenic diets over time. You could see the beginning of blood sugar disruptions if they're making a lot of lipopolysaccharide in their gut because they're, eating a real high-fat diet. So there's a lot of ways that you can start to influence glucose. But why glucose dysregulation is important? So let me walk through that with you. When you're pre-diabetic, you already are damaging your arteries. And so the inner lining of the arteries, known as the glycocalyx, you start to create more inflammatory signaling. You start making more small LDL cholesterol that gets into that glycocalyx, and now your immune system has to respond to it, and you create plaque. Right? You start to plaque your arteries. So insulin resistance leads cardiovascular disease. Top thing that kills us. What's the next thing that happens? Well, I don't know if you realize this, but if you just drive around, you'll notice there's a lot of dialysis centers. People that have kidney disease, and the biggest factor in developing kidney disease and the eventual need for dialysis is people that were insulin resistant and people with diabetes for years and years and years. People will think, oh, if I just take my medication, that's going to make it all better. And that means I can kind of eat the way I want. I just need to take more meds. Well, that's kind of the situation of, I'm going to set a forest fire and then I'm going to put it out. And now I'm going to set another forest fire and I'm going to put it out. Guess what? You're still burning the trees. It doesn't matter if the net effect is, oh yeah, I took more meds and now my glucose came down. The idea is try to control your blood sugar better through the lifestyle choices. Exercise is important. Zone 2 cardio really helps people to get their glucose under control. Strength training, resistance training really helps. Managing your stress. It's super important to understand the metabolic effect of stress and cortisol and the loss of your diurnal pattern of cortisol and its impact on glucose. When you flatten your cortisol curve, meaning that you no longer have this differentiation of a spike of your cortisol in the morning, dropping fairly significantly at noon, dropping again at 5 p.m., then going to nothing at bedtime so you can release melatonin and tell your brain it's time to repair and go to sleep and let the lymphatics clear out all the waste products of metabolism from the brain. That's like the cycle of the day. When you flatten that curve, and meaning that you're basically no longer in that circadian pattern, 333% increased risk of cardiometabolic disease. Wow, 333%. And cardiometabolic means heart disease, diabetes, right? That's that whole thing of why you hear the term metabolic syndrome. It's people that are pre-diabetic, pre-hypertensive, obese, have disordered lipids, and a lot of that begins the journey with your glucose being out of balance. And look, it's no big surprise. Think how many soft drinks people have drank. Think how many times you're chowing on cookies, eating donuts, having a real high-carb meal, right? It's not a surprise that these things happen to people because we were never told it was wrong not to eat them, right? You know, nobody stops on the way home to get some broccoli. People stop on the way home because they're stressed out from their day and they're either stopping in the liquor store or stopping somewhere to get something that's satisfying them, which typically is either high carb, high sugar, or high carb, high sugar, high fat, and crunchy. Oh, it's not enough that you get a donut. You get a cream-filled donut that's got bacon on top of it. Chocolate-covered pretzel with sea salt and bacon drizzled with caramel. Those are the kind of things that disrupt your blood sugar. It's important to understand glucose and insulin together because that's why the term insulin resistance. But remember, once you have a 90 blood sugar, you're getting microcapillary damage. And look, that's Kaiser Permanente study, gosh, about a decade ago, 47,000 lives over 10 years. And a 90 blood sugar is still normal, guys. Pretty important to understand that. You're still in range. So ideally, where do you want your blood sugar to be? I like telling people that somewhere between 73 and 84, and your morning blood sugar is probably ideal. Like if you're in the upper 80s, probably not such a big deal. But once you get into the 90s, or if you're hypoglycemic, meaning your blood sugars are going down in the 60s, a lot of times that hypoglycemia is being caused because you're making too much insulin. So when you eat something, you overproduce insulin and you basically take all the blood sugar out of your bloodstream. And now you feel that crash, you get clammy, you get that feeling of being edgy, maybe a little dizzy, and I've got to get some food in me because I can feel that happening. So that hypoglycemia, a lot of times, is the early warning sign that in your future is hyperglycemia, right? So understanding glucose, heart disease number 1, kidney disease number 2, and then dementia, known as type 3 diabetes, right? So why is that important? Well, it turns out, so when you're a person with type 2 diabetes or type 1 diabetes, you make more of something called lipopolysaccharide, circulating endotoxin. That crosses the blood-brain barrier and it triggers the microglial cells of your brain. And the microglial cells are your immune cells of your brain. They are the patrollers. They're super important for, brain health and immune regulation, right? You hit your head, you're going to trigger your microglial cells. But the point being is when you chronically turn on those microglial cells because your blood sugars are always off, you start to activate those microglial cells to release oxidative compounds. And then those oxidative compounds, right, known as free radicals, right? They're increasing the rate of rusting of your neurons. So they damage your neurons die off, they break apart, they release more components like neurolaminin, laminin, alpha-synuclein, and those components trigger more microglial activation. So it's this vicious cycle that happens when your blood sugars are running high, you're making too much lipopolysaccharide, and you activate those microglial cells. There's one more part to that. People that have higher blood sugars a lot of times are making more of a compound in their blood called galectin-3. And they actually use this to look at measurement for increased risk for fibrosis of your heart or different tissues. Obviously, even in cancer treatment, they look at galectin-3 and think about, well, hey, if your galectin-3 is coming down with your treatment, that's a good thing. But it also turns out that when you're releasing lipopolysaccharide in your brain, that you start making more galectin-3 in your brain, and it ends up, when it's chronically being expressed, amplifying the metabolic damage that's occurring. And we kind of know this now. There's a lot of research there. It's pointing towards it. And in fact, there's even a biologic in phase 2A trials that blocks galectin-3. And guess what's happening with people with dementia? Their mini mental status exams are improving. It's restoring their memory, understanding, well, why is it that dementia is called type 3 diabetes? It's because when your glucose is poorly controlled, you trigger neuroinflammation, and there's a whole change in the way your body is beginning to function, and you start to damage those neurons. And so there's these culprits like galectin-3 and lipopolysaccharide that are all being triggered because your glucose regulation is poor, your insulin regulation is poor, and that leads to that third big category: heart disease, kidney disease, dementia. And there's other complications, right? Non-traumatic amputations are due to diabetes, blindness. You're going to develop cataracts because as you start to have higher and higher glucose, you hear this term hemoglobin A1C. Hemoglobin A1C, glycated hemoglobin. So what's happening? You're sticking sugar on a protein, and that's creating damage. Same thing happens to your eyes. That's why people with diabetes end up accelerating, cataract formation too, because of the glycation process that takes place. So hemoglobin A1C ends up being important because it's a long-term indicator of where your glucose regulation is at. But you have to look at it in the light of, where's my glucose, where's my insulin, and where's my A1C? Because in the early stages, you may have a low A1C. Hey, my hemoglobin A1C is 5.1, and say the end of the acceptable range is 5.6. So you go, oh, 5.1, that's pretty good. But if your glucose is 92 and your insulin is 10, meaning that you're making too much insulin at fasting in order to manage your glucose, it's only a matter of time and your A1C is going to go up. So that's why you want to look at labs as a family, as a pattern, as it relates to your glucose. What are the other things you need to look at? Obviously, kidney function, looking at lipids, because you know what? All people with diabetes have heart disease. That's why I say you need to look at your fasting glucose. Why do we have the Ozempic nation? Why do we have the Manjaro nation? Because people tried to exercise, tried to diet in many cases, some didn't, but also had uncontrollable food noise, and uncontrollable food noise is a part of that reward cascade, probably due to stress. They have all these factors, and when they utilized the GLP-1, it was the first time in maybe years for them that they could see the scale move, because it improved the way glucose utilization and insulin utilization occurred in their body. It turned off their glucagon. When your glucagon gets turned off, now you can access the fat stores. But here was the weak link to that. If you don't adopt exercise, getting enough protein in, typically 1.6 grams per kilogram of your ideal body weight you're looking for, you'll end up losing lean mass. And so while the GLP-1 revolution, I think, is incredibly important, there's a way that you have to look at glucose and insulin. And maybe before you think, hey, I got to go on Ozempic, or I got to go on semaglutide or tirzepatide, probably the more important things to do to start your glucose regulation, start exercising regularly. If exercise is overwhelming to you, or you think you don't have the time, start with just walking 10 minutes after meals. We know that walking 10 minutes after meals is going to help your glucose. And what I have found with folks is that if I get them moving some, they start to adopt moving more. So if we move from that even 10 minutes after meals to 30 to 60 minutes a day. So if you look at the information that's been published, as little as 21 minutes a day of exercise will significantly reduce your cardiovascular disease risk and your diabetes risk. Most of the information would say try to hit 180 minutes a week of exercise. Start with walking. Walking works. Now, I would say don't dawdle walk. Try to walk at a brisk pace, get your heart rate up a little bit, sweat a little bit. And then also it's important to strength train. Resistance training really helps to keep your lean mass, which is, your really what's driving your metabolism. It's what's going on with your myokines and what's going on with your muscle tissue. And the big problem that happens with people with diabetes and insulin resistance is they start to store fat on their muscle. So I always tell people, you don't want to become A5 Wagyu. You don't want a lot of fat in your muscle. You want to be lean, really lean muscle. And the biggest thing that inhibits that is when you become insulin resistant or you become a person with diabetes. The other one, sleep, so important, and managing stress. Those are the lifestyle choices, better choices in food. We start usually people on, a modified low carb, low allergen, anti-inflammatory diet. Take out the big foods that are inflammatory, eat less carbs, learn how to calculate. Hey, if you're at 200 grams of carbs, start out with trying to get down to 100. And by no means is it, you got to go low carb. The other thing is you got to realize, well, how active am I? If I sit all day, do I really need a lot of fuel? Probably not. So it's understanding that for your lifestyle, how much you move, what you do for a living. If you're a bricklayer, you're a stonemason, you may need a little bit more, right? It's good. If you're sitting at a laptop all day, maybe you don't have to eat quite as much. Once you get past lifestyle, what are the key nutrients that you think about for blood sugar regulation? Well, the number one thing that was, National Institutes of Health have published this. The number one nutrient deficiency or nutrient that's not, when it's not optimal, that it's associated with the development of metabolic syndrome and type 2 diabetes, magnesium status. You need magnesium for glucose regulation and ATP production. And it's published over and over again. And I can tell you right now, probably the single most important nutrient that I've given people over the last 42 years is getting them to take magnesium and measuring their magnesium, looking at their red blood cell magnesium and try to get it in that optimal range between 5.6 or 7 and 6.2. Get it up into that optimal range, because people, hey, wow, I'm not getting leg cramps. My blood pressure went down. My blood sugar is better. I'm performing better in my exercise. I'm not as sore anymore. All of that is because you got your magnesium status back. And it makes sense because, one, even when we eat organic food here in the US, we don't know how nutrient dense our soil is. You can pick spinach or broccoli from, the eastern part of the country, then get it from the western part of the country, and the nutrient value is completely different. There's been plenty of studies to show that it's variable on nutrient density in foods. Now, where is the richest source of magnesium? If you're going to eat, there's a molecule called chlorophyll. Chlorophyll that's in plants, especially the darker they are, the better. With chlorophyll, the center of the chlorophyll molecule is magnesium. Just like when you eat meat to get iron, heme is what is rich in red meat. So you eat red meat to build your iron store, and sometimes people eat too much and they don't measure their iron because, once again, too much iron's bad, just the right amount of iron's good. If you want to get magnesium through your diet, you got to eat a bunch of green leafy vegetables. And I got to tell you right now, people don't eat enough vegetables. It is what it is. Look at the statistics. I know I try. I don't even know that I get my goal. We make all our food fresh. We order organic food. We go to the store and pick up organic produce. But I'm also very busy and I'm traveling. And sometimes I don't get that. So I always am supplementing with magnesium. What kind of magnesium? First thing somebody's going to ask. I like magnesium bisglycinate. I think it absorbs the best. It gives you about 20% elemental magnesium. So how much magnesium do you need to take in a day? It's based on elemental magnesium. So the minimum would be somewhere around 500 milligrams a day. You do it in divided doses, because if you take too much magnesium at once, sometimes it makes you loose. Your stool's loose. Depending how much you're working out, you may need to take more. And depending how big you are, you may need to take more. Now, there's other forms of magnesium, and we'll get the dosing based on weight in a minute. But magnesium threonate right now is real important. Mag 3 at bedtime. Man, I'm taking that for my sleep. That's where I get my magnesium. Well, unfortunately, it's great for sleep. No doubt about it. 144 milligrams of elemental magnesium in 2,000 milligrams of magnesium threonate. You got to take a fair amount of that to get enough magnesium. Is it good to take at bedtime? Sure. So if you want to take mag threonate at night and take mag bisglycinate during the day, good. But problem is, you're not going to get to that ideal amount as easily. Other magnesiums that are of value: magnesium taurate. So if you're somebody that maybe blood pressure, or maybe you've got palpitations, magnesium taurate can work pretty good, and it absorbs really well. The other one would be magnesium malate. And magnesium malate's really good because it gets the lactic acid out of your muscle better than other forms of magnesium. Only drawback on mag malate, it's pretty simple. It's like people that may have irritable bowel. It might be a little bit irritating to their gut. So in general, I recommend mag glycinate is my number one. If you want to dose based on your weight, if you're not a very active person, think about 5 milligrams per kilogram body weight. If you're moderately active, let's say you're working out 5 days a week for an hour, maybe 6 days a week for an hour, you're noticing, hey, I get some muscle cramps from staying sore too long. That's more, in that mid-range of 7.5 milligrams per kilogram. And then if you're active as an athlete, like I said, I work on all kinds of people, pro athletes, people that are training for events, and then, working with people that you're struggling with conditions. So if you're really active, training hard, 10 milligrams per kilogram over the years I found to be, really effective. And that's of elemental magnesium, and that's spread out over the day. So the first thing is, probably need to understand, well, how do I get kilograms? It's pretty easy. You take your weight in pounds. You weigh 200 pounds, you divide it by 2.2. So got a calculator on your smartphone. That's going to tell you how many kilograms you are. If you're 90 kilograms and you work out over an hour a day, 6-7 days a week, the calculation would be 10 milligrams times 90, 900 milligrams a day for that individual. Next, a couple other nutrients that are important. Chromium. I think we underdose chromium in our, most of the time, if you go and buy chromium, it's 200 micrograms, it's 100 micrograms. Chromium, every time your insulin receptor fires, you use 4 molecules of chromium. It's called chromium transport protein 4. So in your cell, you need chromium to send the signal to make your insulin receptor work. A lot of research would say that maintenance is probably more like 800 micrograms a day, and that's going to make your insulin receptors work better. That's why people with taking chromium in order to help their blood sugars, their low blood sugar, it helps them to lose some weight. But a lot of times when they take chromium, once the weight stops, you go, oh, I'm going to stop taking my chromium. You really should stay on your chromium. What's the initial dose on chromium? I usually recommend people that do maybe, 1,200 to 1,500 micrograms a day of chromium nicotinate diglycinate, or GTF chromium. And you want to do that for about 30 days. And then you can maintenance out between 600 and 800 micrograms a day. We don't get a lot of chromium in our grains anymore because we grind them and pulverize them and micronize them. And basically, when you're polishing those grains, you lose a lot of the trace nutrients that are in it. Chromium is also known as glucose tolerance factor. So chromium, magnesium, probably the 2 big ones for glucose. The other one, zinc, is important for the insulin receptor complex. So getting in 30 to 50 milligrams of zinc a day, pretty important in order to help that insulin receptor function. And then, vitamin B3 can be important. And then if you really want to go to step 2, alpha lipoic acid. Lots of studies showing that alpha lipoic acid helps with insulin receptor sensitivity. A couple things to know about alpha lipoic acid. One, if you take it, your urine's going to smell funny. It's going to be sulfury, and you shouldn't be surprised by that. I can't tell you how many people have asked me over the years, is it normal? Is there something wrong? No, it's not wrong. It's the smell because it's a sulfur-based compound. How much do you take? Probably the minimum to really be effective for blood sugar regulation and to help those, insulin receptors, 600 milligrams a day. Divided doses, 300 twice a day. Those are probably the 4 big nutrients to help with glucose regulation. Then you can get into botanicals. Does bitter melon work? Well, yeah, it turns out that a 10% Charanton's bitter melon is used by medical doctors in Germany to lower blood sugar. And then obviously any herb that is going to help lower your cortisol, because remember, if your cortisol is high, you're going to be insulin resistant and your glucose is going to be off. So the adaptogen family of herbs can help if it's partly stress induced. So those are some of the key things that you can do related to glucose. And obviously, probably the single most important, in my opinion anyway, single most important lab value that you can try to control if you really want to lean into longevity and performance health.